Welcome to this Sustainable Entertainment Education Series event, also known as SEEDS, produced by the greenproductionguide.com partners. My name is Audrey Vinant-Tang, co-chair of the Sustainable Production Alliance's Clean Energy Committee, and thank you for joining us for this important discussion on clean power for productions. The fact that you're here means you're concerned about the carbon footprint of our industry and you're curious to know what to do about it. Last year, the Sustainable Production Alliance, or SPA, which is a consortium of the world's leading film, television, and streaming companies, released the first industry-wide report of carbon emission averages for film and TV productions, and fuel was one of the largest sources of emissions. Climate change is already affecting our productions and our personal lives in so many ways, from wildfires and droughts to storms and floods. The good news is that we have data-driven solutions and concrete ways to reduce our carbon footprint while containing costs and keeping creativity. We're taking action. Together, the SPA and the Producers Guild of America Foundation's Green Committee are committed to accelerating sustainable action of the industry through open resources and tools on greenproductionguide.com or GPG. We know collective action is the only way for us to get where we need to be further, faster. It will require every crew member, every department head, and every creative problem solver. Now it's my pleasure to introduce one of those creative problem solvers. Our panel moderator, Clara George, is an award-winning Vancouver-based producer who's at the forefront of the environmental movement. She is a GPG task force member and works with local, national, and international stakeholders to create green solutions for the film industry. During a series of panels, we'll hear what is happening right now, how all of our shows can start to decarbonize today. So let's get going. Our first panel, Production Stages, Facilities, Backlots, and Grid Power, tackles sustainable energy solutions in some of our more controlled environments, at least compared to location production. That doesn't mean there aren't plenty of challenges, and our panelists are ready to take them on.
Hi, I'm Clara. Okay, let's start with the basics of clean energy. Burning fuel, gas, diesel, natural gas, and propane is literally what creates greenhouse gas emissions. So if your production can reduce your fuel consumption, you will lower your carbon footprint. It's that easy and doesn't have to be more expensive. You don't need the latest technology to make a huge dent in your fuel consumption. There's plenty that you can do right now that will save you time and money. So welcome, everybody.
Hello.
Holly, can you please tell us what made you decide to electrify your backlot for season 2 of The Gilded Age?
Twofold. I mean, basically, it was a practical decision that, you know, once you start looking at the numbers and you start getting into the numbers, it sort of makes a lot of financial sense. And also just the idea that it's the right thing to do, particularly for a set that's going to remain there for an untold period of time. But I would say we talked about a little bit. We didn't go to the studio too much at first until we gathered all the information together and got really far down the road with the logic of it. But then once we presented it and Mike ran all the numbers, that way they were fairly quick to say yes, because we had sort of done all the legwork of what it will take to do it.
It was something we wanted to do. It's something we could do. It's something that we had the mental and physical capacity to do. And it just seemed like the right thing to do.
We're a show also that is episodic and that hopes to be here for multiple seasons. So again, it's sort of a bit of an investment, not only in this season, but potentially future seasons.
How many generators are you looking at getting rid of by installing clean grid power?
So season 1, when we shuttered our backlot, we brought in 4 generators, which had the capacity to do 1 million watts. It was a massive structure. We had multiple companies coming in between transformers and cables and generators and trucking. It was sort of there was a lot to bring in. So in a perfect world, all of that goes away.
It's great that you guys are doing this in the off season as early prep, and you're getting this ready for season 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or however long you go. How long has this process taken?
I would say months, to be honest with you.
Ted, you're hearing this for the first time. How would you tell people to go about this on future productions?
Well, I mean, I give a lot of credit to Holly and Michael because, you know, as they both said, it's taken a lot of time to go through, and it's a lot of logistics that involve, and you need studio support. But I mean, overall, it makes our lives so much easier. I mean, I know it's a lot of work up front, but it's less labor that's needed as we shoot, and eventually it's going to save the studio more money. I think it's just, again, as both of them said, it's just a lot of time. This is not something that you can do overnight. And I think it just adds into slowing production down a little bit, or like they've done in between seasons, just making sure that you plan out your logistics a little bit better. But I mean, I don't see any reason, if you're not shooting somewhere for multiple seasons and multiple years, that, this shouldn't be the standard. Again, it helps the studio in the long run, and it's going to help us all, to make our jobs easier, make the world a little bit safer.
Yeah, I mean, especially something like a backlot, it's really your home base. And, one of the things we're asking, the PGA is asking for, is that we start looking at our studios first. We look at our studios, our backlots, our lockups, our parking areas, the place where we're going to spend most of our time. It's these types of large scale power infrastructure upgrades aren't going to work for a set you're shooting in for 3 days or for 3 hours.
We did a huge cost analysis on status quo versus plugging in to the backlot, and we used a lot of numbers, and we extended it a few seasons, and we definitely looked at the different scenarios. This was, for us in particular, this was really a no-brainer to do this. It worked out financially.
Also, we're in a we're in a park. So it's not directly adjacent to houses, but they are through the trees and they're sort of around us. So having something that's quieter, having something that's a little more environmentally friendly, and being aware of our neighbors is something that's important to us too. So just sort of trying to keep ourselves as good neighbors to our folks at the county and then the actual residents around us. We're trying not to be a burden on our neighbors.
The Nassau County was happy with it. The utility was happy with it. Our crew was happy with it. Everybody we talked to said this was a good idea and this was a positive thing to do.
With going about trying to make this change in the industry, like, how are you having that conversation with the studio? Or is that something where, the budget is the budget and we're just going about it? Because I feel like so many times, again, this is what I run into with the UPM or a line producer. It's just like, the money's tight, we don't have it, but obviously the technology is there. It's just that it costs a little bit more.
As a production manager, as a producer, you have a job to do. You have to deliver this show, on time and on budget, and that's important. And I want to say that I don't blame that person for saying, okay, I know this is the greener alternative, but we just can't do it now.
Personally, what I have to do on productions, and what I ask my crew to do, is provide a full operational budget. Gas is something that we put in the back. Nobody thinks about it. But when you add in the cost of the fuel to run that generator, when you add in the manpower to run the cable, and as you said earlier, Ted, the electrification of a backlot is going to ultimately save the production a lot of time, labor, money, cable, equipment, all that sort of stuff.
I think one of the greatest things out of this conversation is that, you can see, and especially from your experience, Clara, there's totally different solutions between Vancouver, where you are, where I am in Los Angeles, where Holly and Michael are. I mean, we all do things a little bit differently, and there's departments that are responsible for certain things, like in terms of transportation and base camp. Like in New York, it's a certain department. Here, our transportation department handles it. I don't know how you all handle it up there, Clara, but and so what happens is, you, within the industry and how old it is now, you have little niches that everyone has carved out. And like here in Los Angeles, the transportation department usually handles the generators. And so it's such a hard conversation to have with someone about taking away necessarily like a means of their livelihood. And so I think any solution that we come up here with in Los Angeles, it's got to somehow compensate those people for lost income, or if we're going to demand that, we kind of hybridize their generators in a certain way, like some way to kind of help subsidize that for them, to make it such that the willingness to do it is there, as opposed to just demanding someone take action and change and invest all this money into something that's kind of helped their livelihood, if that makes sense.
In my experience, you pay for the show generators anyways, even if you are tied in. I think we are unfortunately a ways away from not carrying generators. The messaging that we need to put out there is that we aren't taking away your generators, but asking you not to turn them on if there is a clean energy alternative. Explore that first. There is a huge fear that clean technology is going to change labor. And I don't see that actually happening. In fact, if you look at the transition from film to digital, it added labor. into the film set.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, look what's happened over the last, let's say, 5 to 10 years, right? The budgets for these shows has gone up. We have gotten much more green than we were 10 years ago, right? We're using more and more LED lights than previous lights, than previous tungsten or previous HMI or any of that kind of thing. But the number of lights that we're using in terms of number is exploding, right? So we've gotten greener, but our crews have gotten larger because we're using more and more instruments.
Especially in Los Angeles, there's so many places that got shot in time and time again. And it's, of course, it's an upfront investment to do it in a way that makes it repeatable. But I mean, again, there's absolutely no reason not to.
You were talking about facilities, and we had a situation where we had a stage, and it was a facility that had about 8 stages that we were working at, and one company had 4 stages. We had the other 4. So and we needed more power on one of the stages. Just for whatever reason, we just needed more. And instead of bringing in generators, we called the other company and said, hey guys, can we tie in to your stage? What are your shoot dates? Where are you going to be? How can we do this? We'll pay the bill. We'll send you an insurance certificate. And it worked great. And it saved us a ton of time and energy. Everybody got paid. And we kept generators out of it, and we stayed green. So it's just an example of how you can kind of think outside the box.
I would love to work with someone like Holly and Michael. I mean, you two get it. I feel like you're very willing to go back to the studio and have conversations about, maybe it's going to cost a little bit more, but in the long run, this is going to benefit us in much better ways. And I hope that through this, other UPMs, line producers in general, work up either the courage or they understand that there's support and momentum to do that, because there's no reason at this stage that we can't move most of our productions to sustainable practices, whether that's grid power, whether that's battery packs. Like you've said so many times before, Clara, I mean, this is also an economic driver for each of our locations. You were talking about employing hundreds of people outside of just our immediate business to make this happen. And it's definitely possible.
We've been speaking a lot about the power of our industry, the influence that we have, the buying power that we have, the way we can switch technologies. How important is it to have that conversation with every supplier, with every vendor, with every facility owner? Has the conversation come up that, oh, well, where do we tie in our base camp? Why don't we have a transformer in the parking lot?
There are a lot of studios that will say, we're trying to make a push to green energy, but somewhere between that statement and the budget that becomes the reality of making the show, there's this difficulty where the industry is having trouble in kind of navigating that. And that's obviously due to a plethora of factors. So I would say, of course, I always try to have the conversation with the UPMs that I'm working with and the line producers. It's just about the reality of what can the show unfortunately afford. And maybe that's a larger conversation for some kind of tax credit for shows or something, some kind of an action that, Seeds is going to bring about. But I find that more often than not, the reality of what we're trying to accomplish and the reality of the economic side of filmmaking is kind of at a heads, and we're trying to navigate that space. And it's a little troubling at the current time.
This is what we need to keep our business going. Being green and being able to prove that we are doing things the right way is going to allow us access to parks, to locations, to city streets. And I think it's our responsibility to stay ahead of this and, develop the technology and develop the mindset, because we're also, frankly, we're the cool kids. We're the ones that people watch. And I think that if you see a crew shooting on a film set, then, you don't want to see 5 diesel generators running all the time.
Most of the studios, that are participating in these programs, they want to be able to say we did a good job. We're doing the better by the environment. One individual show only has so much influence on a studio, but an HBO or a NBC or an entity that is much larger and has multiple shows over multiple years will have a much larger voice in the conversation about, trying to make those kind of changes, infrastructure changes in stages and facilities that are rented time and time again from the same large companies. that's when it's important for the Netflixes and the Amazons and the people of the world who have a lot of power to sort of say they want to partner and upgrade these facilities they rent from year to year.
I think that the conversation has to happen at all levels. And I think that the first, conversation from studio executives is, we're coming in for a show. We can't even tell you the name about it. We want to put something on hold for 8 months in 2023. And we want enough power to run all of our systems. So we need at least 4 to 5, 400 amps, circuits, so that we can not run diesel generators at our home base. That's conversation number one. Conversation number two is the local producers and production managers who come in to tour the facility and go, oh yeah, I hear I'm going to be here. This will be my home for the next 6 months or 8 months. Very cool. Where's the coffee? Where's this? And oh, by the way, do we have enough power? And then conversation number three is when Ted shows up with his crew and talks to the facility operations person and says, well, I'm going to need 1 million megawatts or whatever you said you're putting on your backlot. Where do I get it? And I think that the more this becomes one giant conversation, it'll shift. It'll just become the way we do things. The other thing that we're going to need to start asking our facilities for now is EV charging. As we electrify our fleet, we need to make sure that those upgrades that take months and months to plan are happening now at our facilities.
It's a team effort. It's the producer, it's the gaffer saying, okay, these are the instruments we're going to use. It's the transportation coordinator that says, yes, we'll get these guys, certified to drive buses. It's, the DP that says, okay, I'll shoot at a lower stop. Maybe it's early in the show and maybe you can cover it some way. Maybe you can talk to post. Maybe, there's so many factors that go into those decisions. It's everybody, that needs to contribute. It's not just one person.
Thank you guys so much for having this conversation. It's amazing to hear from you. Thank you, Holly, Mike, and Ted. And please check out the SPA facilities report on greenproductionguide.com.
Our second panel, Mobile Power, Tie-ins, Right-Sizing Generators, and Batteries, dares to challenge some of our traditional carbon-heavy thinking and looks at alternatives that could pay off in both carbon footprint and budget.
How do you minimize fuel when you're out there on location winging it every day? Diesel generators make up approximately 25% of our fuel use, and they burn a lot of fuel. One large generator can create 1 ton of carbon per day. So let's check in with a producer from New York, a rigging gaffer from Hawaii, and a location manager from Atlanta. Mary Jo, how much of your production time is spent on location?
Well, it depends on the project, but I would say in terms of location versus stage, I would say probably 70-30. It's a good average.
How much power do we actually need? I mean, Jason, are we overpowering our sets?
Well, yes, we do. The routine, the standard is just to reflexively order sort of the largest standard generator that's available, which is a 1400 amp, 1600 amp generator. And just run that and turn it on, just in case. And oftentimes you could get by with a much smaller generator.
And Jason, how many sources of power do you think we actually need when we're on location? It's not just one generator or one source.
No, generally speaking, on most shows, we have multiple power sources, often multiple production generators. And then once you're, out on location, you've got base camp generators, you've got support generators for craft service, for charging batteries on trucks, multiple generators once you hit a location.
And currently the business as usual is to be using diesel for all of these generators, correct?
Best case would be diesel for all of them. Oftentimes you also have the smaller, really inefficient gas generators, the small Honda 2000s and 5000s as well.
I think the other thing we have to ask for is the right size of generators. It feels like we're always getting, the extra large, the 1400 amps, 1600 amps, because they're either attached to the truck or they're what everyone thinks we need just in case. But with the new lighting, we don't really need that.
Absolutely. Those big generators running without a big load on them are really inefficient. They still burn massive amounts of diesel fuel without actually turning it into electricity. So it's completely wasted energy. You can use much smaller generators if you're willing to commit to lighting your set with smaller or more efficient lights.
And the catering truck and the craft service truck.
The thing that we didn't talk about, or the thing that we should talk about, is, and I ask people this all the time when I walk on a set, is why are all these lights on right now? We're not even shooting in this part of the set. Why is the green screen lit? Can you please turn this off? I mean, we all need to just start thinking more efficiently too. The less efficient generator you use, the more carbon you're outputting.
I think that the takeaway here is that as, we need to use our buying power on productions to ask for the most fuel efficient generator possible, because you are spending more money on fuel you're emitting more if you're using the older gear.
And the answer that I get about all new technology from vendors, the thing that they all say is, as soon as I start seeing these on people's lists, I will start buying them.
So we're burning multiple tons of carbon per day between all of these generator sources. How do we fix this?
Globally, what we need to think about is how do we reduce the fossil fuels on a film production, and how do we start to transition to clean energy? When you're approaching a location or even a stage facility, is to make sure that you have adequate power and that you can tie in over burning diesel generators.
If we are overpowering the sets, sometimes we're looking for the wrong size tie-in. So, that's another thing that I've come across, is that if you're looking at catering, 100 amps might be enough, but traditionally, because we're kind of mimicking these 1600 amp generators, we're looking for 400 amps. If you have a location that is run purely on LED lighting and you need very little draw, then maybe the question is, can I plug into the wall plugs, because you could actually run it off of AC cords. So there's, those are conversations that need to happen early on, and we'll never replace, or not never, but today we will not replace every single diesel generator, but we might be able to replace one.
I think this is something that all producers and location managers and production managers and line producers have to really ask themselves when you are looking at a location, what is the viability of reducing our carbon footprint and burning as little fuel as we possibly can. So is it a choice to go to a location that you can tie in? Does that move it to the forefront of this is a better location? Or even having that conversation with directors and showrunners and creative to say, this is a great location, but we're going to be dependent on fossil fuel. Can we be looking at can we consider another location? I mean, I don't think anyone should be afraid of having that conversation, because there's always an alternative.
So Dave, if Mary Jo was your producer and she came in and said, this is the priority on the show, what would you do next?
I mean, the short answer is it depends. I mean, it's all about the types of locations, and it's about the time. Unless you're going to like large commercial properties, there's no physical way to tie in, because there's not that source of power there. I can think of one case at a residential property where I know a movie brought in a temporary power pole, and I give them credit for that. But what that took is it took time and money and preparation. And I think for myself in particular, I make most of my living on commercials. There is no way that sort of thing could ever happen on the pace we're expected to do, because by the time we have a location selected, we're shooting within a week. That would never happen with the utility company in that type of time. I think the places, in my experience, and Jason could speak this better, where we ever do tie in, it's usually like a high-rise building, a large commercial like arena or something like that has enormous amounts of industrial power already. It's not going to be you're shooting at a exterior or that, because the power there doesn't exist.
When I think of tie-ins, there's a couple different things, right? There's the impromptu tie-in where the building engineer comes in and pulls a breaker out and drops some cam locks, and you can now connect a piece of banded cable and do a day's shooting on the 17th floor. And then the other kind of tie-in that we've done recently is, like David said, just straight power drops. And more, I have worked with the location managers who know who to call at SoCal Edison to get the guy who does the field work to come out and just take a look. He got everything going to get us a power drop, so we didn't need to use diesel generators there.
What was the lead time on that? To turn around that power drop out there, I'm curious.
4 weeks from beginning to end. On the TV series Californication, we went to the producers and said, look, we carry 4 generators on this show, and we could easily power both these buildings with Dave Duchovny's apartment and these other sets on them. But could we look into talking with SoCal Edison about arranging, I see power running right past this building, can we get that? And so we did, and they ended up they invested, I think it was almost $25,000 to work with SoCal Edison to get power into 2 buildings. But over the course of 3 seasons, I think it ended up costing them less just in terms of diesel fuel.
I have a question for you as a location manager in Atlanta, and I know that the nature of commercial production is a lot, more very fast moving, and decisions are made very fast, but you must go back to the same locations repetitively for certain things. So is it a bigger conversation with the city of Atlanta and the film commission and the municipalities to say, we are a community of filmmakers. We film in this city, in these regions multiple times. We, the film industry, are asking for power drops, as a way to reduce our carbon emissions and reduce the footprint and the impact that we're having on the city. I think, Clara, you've been super successful in that in Vancouver, and I think it requires a community coming forward.
I'm always going for the path of least resistance. So I'm looking at, in all of these major cities, there's a handful of places where you can park your unit, right? There's a handful of places where you have an empty parking lot that they're going to let you bring in everything. That's where you start. Those are commercially owned. Those are private.
Yeah, the base camps, not like someone's house.
The base camp will burn more fuel than any other generator position.
And I can tell you in Atlanta, those number of base camp locations are shrinking in a hurry because it's parking lots.
Right. So it's the conversation with the parking lot owners.
They would love for you to bring in more power into their property. It's all about the quote unquote putting a price on something, because for us to do the legwork to get that power drop, if a production's willing to pay us the additional prep, because it's just, let's be honest, it's more work than making one phone call and getting a generator there, that the amount of legwork we're going to have to do that, we can do it, but someone has to pay that bill.
What we found is working with the film commission, working at it as an overview, so that the lead time is there. And then once the drop is installed, every production can use it going forward. It ends up working out because we've got these legacy projects of one production paid for the electrification because they were going to be there for a long time. And if you're going to be there for a long time, the cost incentive to not burn diesel fuel is huge. It is always less expensive for the production to do the tie-in, even if there's an investment up front. If you're going to be there for a large number of days, you're looking at spending about $300 to $400 a day on fuel every time you burn a generator. So what is that tipping point? It makes sense if you're spending $20,000 up front and you're going to save $50,000 over the course of the show.
If it's something where they're there a week or less, they're like, well, we're not going to make that kind of investment because they've got to control the real estate for a long amount of time to justify investing in someone else's property.
The other thing that happens though on location, and you guys both brought it up, is that it's obvious if you're shooting on the roof of a high rise that you're tying in.
Correct.
Well, if there's enough power in that high rise at the top floor, there's enough power of the high rise at the ground floor. So, the conversation also needs to shift, is that if I'm going into any kind of building, that it does have power, do you have any available circuits we can use? And then how much power is available? And then locations goes to the rigging gaffer and says, I've got 200 amps, can you use it? And then the
Yes.
conversation of the 200 amps, is it willing to be done?
Well-
And of course, to your point, Dave, this is, you want to pick off your low hanging fruit first.
It's all of this goes back to cost.
It depends on how you're calculating your generator fuel. Right now, fuel is
True.
a wonderful category in the budget that nobody is accountable for, except for the producers. And we know, we see it every cost report, we see fuel going over and we don't know how to stop it. So this is one way to stop it, is to have those conversations early, to try and change the norm and question.
I know the shows that I can have this conversation, like Netflix shows, Warner Brothers shows, big studio shows, where they have a sustainability office and a green officer and somebody who I've worked with in the past. I can say, you know, hey, I think we can get the money for this from, and I'll name a person at the studio, and that then continues the conversation. And so I'll try and have those conversations, even when I know that it won't go any further, because I want the reluctant producer who's been doing this for 50 years, who is going to retire next year, to go out having done it. And I want to keep talking about it and keep bringing it up. If you keep saying enough times, but what about the battery generators? Like at some point, the person who's reluctant is going to, all right, get the battery generators. And then once you've gotten them, like you said, once you've done it, once you've tried it, once you've made it work, it's really difficult to go back to doing it.
Yeah.
By replacing a diesel generator with a battery that has stored electricity, we really have the same thing. We just need to figure out how to get enough of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's even better because you've charged it from the grid, which, you know, the municipalities and all the utilities' goal is to be net zero, sustainably generated electricity, versus running a diesel generator where you're, you know, burning dozens of gallons of diesel fuel potentially an hour. Then you've just gotten rid of a 5,000 watt gas generator at Crafty and a 2,000 watt generator being pulled around by the camera assistants all day. And those are starting to become on, I wouldn't say they're ubiquitous, but they're getting there. And I've seen these aha moments with like the crusty old painter who doesn't talk to anybody all season, wandering around, and he wanders by Crafty and he sees that thing and he looks, is there electricity in there? I said, there's electricity in there. He goes, and it's no fumes? I said, no fumes. He goes, oh man, the future's amazing. And, you know, he just sort of like, he got what that was. And like because he'd been carrying around a 2,000 watt generator for the last 30 years.
I can honestly say that the visibility of having emissions-free units on your set was sort of astounding. That the cast, the crew, the communities that you're shooting in, when they are when you're not spewing, exhaust from diesel generators, the location teams are happier, the community is happier, especially around our food, to be honest with you. I mean, we oftentimes don't even, because it's been standard operating procedure, we're not even realizing that the exhaust is like around the areas where we are making food and eating food. So I can honestly say it was super successful utilizing these units, and it sparked everybody's imaginations. I think what we really need is we need to ask for them more. We need demand so that there can be more supply. The technology is there, the units exist.
The benefits are quite clear. I think to do it the new way, we have to be honest that there is a cost involved, and it's just a matter of where does that get, who pays for that?
We have to look at all the costs associated with burning fossil fuels. Mm-hmm. There is a price on carbon, and it's going up every day. It's the cost at the pump. And I think that we have to look at that. And if you're actually told, we're going to shoot at this location with what they want to do, we're going to have to run 7 generators. Each generator is going to cost $300 to $400 worth of fuel per day. Or we can bring in an extra day of prep for the rigging crew. We can look at the tie-ins. We can try and arrange a power drop if we have the lead time. And we can start looking at how we can reduce generators. And even if you reduce 2 of them, 3 of them, the operating costs of those generators are massive. And I think the problem is, because of the pace of production, is everybody has traditionally looked at their own department costs only. And I think to move this forward, these departments, your two departments, need to also connect and look at the costs of what happens if you don't get that clean power. This is not a one-person job to green a film set. This is all of us working together to really look at those costs, because when you put them all together, I guarantee you that it does not cost more to be cleaner.
Well, yeah, I mean, it has to start at the top, because I mean, the reality is that for Jason and I, we can advocate for stuff, but unless it's clearly a priority from the studio level on down, we can't do it on our own.
As citizens of, the film community and a film production, I think it's, in locations, it's asking where the tie-ins are for production and producers and production management. It's what does our infrastructure look like? Where can we implement clean technology? What exists in that community? If it doesn't exist in that community, how do we find it? I mean, we're masters at finding, of sourcing things. So, and I think it's also going to the studios and getting their support to implement, because I know that the studios, and certainly the SPA group that we work with the GPG, is extremely aware of our carbon emissions. So, and we're all, and companies are now going to be responsible to report those carbon emissions. So it behooves all of us to sort of jump into, the sort of asking the questions and how do we set it up. And I think once you experience it, it's really hard to go back.
I think that once we understand what our power consumption really can be, and we minimize the power that we're using, then these solutions are going to become much more viable. They're instant, and we can start using them right away. So it's adding a sustainability lens to everything you do.
Everything.
It's horrific when you look at what people spend or budget for fuel for a production, and you think, why am I spending this money on that when I can't get the actor I want, or I can't get the set I want, or this is not going on the screen. And it is a huge portion of our budget that, again, because every department uses it, hasn't been scrutinized, but that's going to change. And once we're responsible for that, and we understand that that is the cost of this dirty technology, then we're going to be able to move forward quickly. The key is that we have to break those barriers of how we used to do it. And again, as film people, we do it all the time. We don't usually take no for an answer from anybody. Well, thank you guys. This has been, as usual, an amazing conversation about how we are going to change this industry and shift towards clean energy. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our final panel on transportation, fuel-efficient practices, renewable diesel, and electric and hybrid vehicles discusses some of the most powerful tools we have to reduce our carbon footprint.
Okay, so we're going to talk transport now with a producer from Los Angeles, a transport coordinator from Vancouver, and a sustainable studios director from Los Angeles. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining on.
Morning.
Morning.
Diana, what else can you do to minimize fuel costs on your shows?
There are so many different things. I mean, one thing is at the very beginning, I think it's important that you look at your schedule and see if there's ways that you can minimize company moves or condense base camps so that you're not moving your base camp. I think that you can work, with the transportation department and the studio to come up with vendors that can supply EV and hybrid vehicles. I mean, sometimes you don't have entire control over that, but as much as you can, it's a discussion that you should definitely have.
Dave, how do you work with production to minimize your fuel?
Yeah, as far as the fuel consumption on our shows, we've tried to just follow the rule of making less trips and making the trips that we are doing more efficient. So grouping things together, not having someone in a 5-ton truck delivering a paper envelope that could be done in a grouped run with smaller vans, smaller trucks that can do the same job. And then also just much to Diana's points about trying to speak with production and with the ADs that are doing the scheduling so that we're being more efficient as far as how much we're moving base camp and the work trucks, where we're parking, if we can get things closer where we don't need to shuttle. There's just so many things. And I think that's the important part, is just the communication and dialogue with all the departments that we service as a transportation department, to try and get their input about how we can do things more efficiently.
As long as you can be conserving fuel, that's the first thing that we want to do, use less fuel to begin with, and then we want to switch to a more sustainable fuel once we've reduced the amount of fuel that we're actually using.
And Mike, renewable diesel, can you just break that down, what that is, please?
Yeah, renewable diesel is a fuel. There are many environmental benefits to renewable diesel. Mainly, the life cycle emissions are 70% less than diesel that's made with crude oil. That's because the feedstock for renewable diesel is plant-based and agricultural waste. So that's the main benefit. And also, for equipment that doesn't have particulate filters in them already, it can also reduce particulate matter by up to 1/3, and also reduce hydrocarbons such as carbon monoxide and nitrous oxide. So it's a drop-in fuel. Warner Brothers is using it in all their diesel equipment, and it can be blended. So it's pretty easy. It's really a matter of supply. That's the biggest challenge. Any production can fuel up on renewable diesel at the Warner Brothers lot in Burbank. They just need to provide a PO and set up an account with Warner Brothers Studio Operations.
Even if you're not a Warner Brothers show, is that what you're saying? Correct.
Yeah.
Good to know. Mm-hmm.
We're trying to get it to our productions up in Vancouver as well, and in other cities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it really is a question of supply, but we just learned that there are gas stations in California that have 100% renewable diesel in them.
Obviously, a big production center here in the States is Atlanta. Is renewable diesel available in Atlanta and in Georgia at all that you know of?
In limited amounts. I think that there's a little bit of an advantage in California because we have some incentives from the state, the California Air Resources Board subsidies. So the pricing is a lot more competitive here in California. It's only about 20 cents per gallon more than regular diesel at our station. So it's definitely cost comparable.
Dave, you recently coordinated a show that embraced a lot of EVs and hybrids. How many did you actually have?
We ended up with about 22 or 23, it fluctuated, full electric vehicles. And then we augmented that with hybrid vehicles. There were certain vehicles where we needed larger capacity, or we needed cargo room that we couldn't access with a full EV. But then even just internal combustion cars, that we were making sure that we were getting the smallest, most efficient vehicle we could, instead of just getting what was available. It was a lot of communication with our suppliers to talk them into finding the best vehicle for our use. With the crew that would normally on a lot of productions would rent back their own vehicle, we were renting them hybrids or EVs to use in place of their personal gas-powered cars.
Dave, would you do it again?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the sort of growing pains and the learning curve were worth it. It certainly would be easier on subsequent shows.
This is less true in Los Angeles, but some of the cities I've worked in, we've had a really hard time accessing electric vehicles or even hybrid vehicles. Mm-hmm. And, in Vancouver, it's probably easier than some places, but obviously, how did you go to the vendor and get them to rent you Tesla? Were they a Tesla outfit? Like, tell me how you went about with getting so many Teslas to work on your production.
I wouldn't say that we strong-armed them, but we basically said to our vendors, I had conversations with them, and it was basically making them that you either got on board and were at the forefront, or you were going to be left behind. Because if it came down to it and I needed to rent 20 to 30 vehicles and you couldn't supply EVs or hybrid vehicles, then I would rent from somewhere else. Even though a lot of those suppliers I've had long-term relationships with, they provide great service, but we really wanted to emphasize that we needed the product. The product was what was more important to us at this point, trying to get this up and running.
Mhm. And then I know, a lot of times it's the studios who make these overhead deals with the various vendors. Mike, is that something that you're working on at Warner Brothers and some of the other studios to sort of encourage your vendors to, or insist on your vendors having EV and hybrid vehicles?
Yeah, our global sourcing group works with, vendors and suppliers across the country and, push for more sustainable alternatives for our productions like electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles. And we're reliant on our suppliers to do that. So yes, I think not only is WarnerMedia, working with our productions and our suppliers to do that, but all of the major studios and content producers are working together to do that as well. So it's really about accelerating, all of this work to get, where it's going. We just want to get it there more quickly.
Right. And as producers, I would strongly encourage you to look at who your studio person is. Most studios now have sustainability people like you, Mike, because you can work with us hand in hand, right? Like if I'm in a new location and don't know who those vendors are, or you guys can be a great resource to us as producers to help push that forward.
Yeah, that's right. We have, other departments within our organization, government affairs and community affairs. And so we can partner with utility companies to kind of learn more about, what their plans are for EV charging infrastructure, that can be, tap into, so to speak, in the future.
To me, the most amazing thing was the reduced cost of fuel. Usually we would budget on a shoot week, probably average around $5,000 a week in fuel. And even for myself personally, I mean, I have a fairly fuel efficient car, and I was using about $100 a week in gasoline. When I switched to a Tesla, it was costing about $35. So not only just the actual economic side of it, which was really surprising to me, but of course the efficiency and the reduced carbon impact that we were having, it really made a difference. And I think for some of it, it's a bit of a learning curve for people that aren't used to using an electric vehicle to try to get them on board, and how they don't need to, fuel up or charge up all the time. There were quite a few times where I got down to 1% and 2% and got over that whole range anxiety, but it was it worked really well. And I've had some conversations with some people then, because with Clara's help, we were kind of the pilot project and a little bit of the guinea pigs, I guess. But I've had conversations with other coordinators now who are starting shows and budgeting for shows. And I think once people get on board with it, it's really gonna show that it's well worth it's not even extra effort, but the effort that it takes to make the transition. And hopefully one day it'll just become the norm. I mean,
Dave, I wanted to just circle back. Can you talk a little bit about using electric cars for your cast and what that actual impact is, like how much the drivers drive on average, and what the cast thought and what the drivers thought?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the production, but in our experience, we were having anywhere between 500 to 1,000 kilometers a week. So say 300 to 600 miles that cast were driving, location dependent, obviously. And then depending on how heavy the day was, as far as how they were picking people up or dropping them off. We had the availability to charge at the studio that we were working through. So we didn't really have as many issues, I think, as some shows could have. And back to what Mike was saying, it was a lot about scaling up and the availability to supply. But we were fortunate that we didn't really have any issues as far as the utility of the vehicles themselves. I think once the drivers got used to it and they got over the idiosyncrasies of driving an EV and then also the range anxiety part of it, there was some resistance, to be honest. People, and I have to admit, I don't deal well with change, but it was really pretty exciting once people got into it and came around and then saw that they were making a difference. It really helped. And I think even as a group, they started to talk amongst themselves about how they could, little tips and tricks that they were sharing with each other. So it worked quite well. The cast themselves were like, oh, wow, we're in a Tesla. Wow, we're driving a Tesla. So I think the novelty of it in the beginning was really good. I think when people realized what we were trying to accomplish, those minor inconveniences were just forgotten quite quickly. I've been talking to other coordinators that are starting shows now, and they're trying to come on board with this and trying to encourage them. And again, it's just a learning process. And I think when it becomes the norm, it's just going to take off because there's so many benefits.
Did you installing any additional EV charging stations, like at your production office or
Yeah,
places?
we did, and we also were in contact with the supply house, the Grip Electric Supply production supply house that we dealt with, and so they were able to fabricate some portable charging systems. We just had them on hand carts, but they hooked up to Seaway. To the 3-phase power. So it basically was like having a level 2 charger that we could take with us wherever we went.
We had those on Call the Wild. They were great, actually.
Yeah, and we would set those up at base camp, and then people would, just take their turn and use it if you needed to. Or there was the ability for us to allow time for that driver to do their deliveries or pickups, and then in between schedule some time where they could hit a supercharger, like a 250K supercharger on the way back, and just even take their 20 minutes there, have a little break, and fully charge their vehicle if it was needed at that point during the day. So again, it was just about trying to maintain the logistics of how we could condense things and then make it all happen on fewer trips.
So Dave, on your production, you spent more money on electric vehicles, on renting them.
Mm-hmm.
You spent more money on getting smaller runabout cars for the set deck department, the construction department, people, so they weren't driving their huge 5-ton trucks to drop off a lamp. But you saved money overall, right?
Yeah, I mean, and I had been coordinating for a long time, and it was always the accepted thing that, the cast would be in a large SUV that would cost, throw a number out there, $600 a week, and then add the fuel on top of it. So really, when we got down to it, when you factor in the reduced fuel cost, but also factor in the fact that in this case, Netflix was paying the carbon offsets, I'm sure we either netted out at zero or we were maybe slightly under in what the actual cost benefit was. So, and again, I think it just, we have, it's a bit astounding if you're not in my department and you don't realize how much money you can spend on a series or a feature film on fuel. And then if you sort of reverse calculate that into the amount of fuel on a big feature, it can easily be $500,000 plus, and then convert that to the amount of liters that we use. It's a lot. It's a lot of fuel that we use.
You were just saying that, a cast driver can drive 300 miles a week or
easily. Yeah.
So you're talking about hundreds of dollars in fuel.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I would say probably on average, they would use at least $50 a day in fuel.
So if you can get an electric car for $50 more a day,
absolutely,
and you've netted out at zero.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the goals is depending on the size of your production and the affordability of this technology is if it's placed in the right place, it'll pay for itself.
And for even smaller sort of non-tangible things like the ability for them as a single passenger vehicle to go when they are picking people up or they're coming back to use the HOV lanes on the freeway, it was a time saver. If there was any kind of traffic, which the studios we were working in were probably about 35 miles or so, 30 miles from the downtown core, which is of course where a lot of the work was done and the actors were staying. and to be able to just, even that as a small thing, to be able to access those and bypass the traffic, not sitting in freeway traffic in a gasoline powered or diesel powered vehicle and breezing through in the HOV was just another added benefit. Really was something that nobody thought about, but then it just became, oh great. So much like most places, you have to have the decal on your car that you're eligible to drive in those lanes. Well, that was a big deal. People were wanting to just get an EV so they could drive in the HOV lane and get to work and do their job faster. So
I have had some difficulty in the past, actually, particularly if I'm working in a place that's either very hot or very cold. And that's the no idle policy. Like, we sort of say that very flippantly, like we have a no idle policy, but I have found that what's often very hard is if you're in a really hot climate, it's hard not to get people to idle because they're in cars, they're waiting in cars, and it's really hot. Or likewise, if you're in a really cold climate. And I just wanted any suggestions or thoughts that either of, or anybody on this panel have that they've been able to do, or we know ways that we can sort of address that. Because I think it's not quite as easy as people make it sound.
we sort of had a little brainstorming over that because, I mean, it can be cold and we were working through the winter with snow and below freezing temperatures. It didn't impact the actual battery charging so much, but you're right. I mean, people trying to keep the vehicle warm or keep themselves warm or have the vehicle, defogged and de-iced so that it's ready to go to drive the cast. We had a tent where you're not sitting in your car, you can go in the tent and it's either heated or cooled through the house power at the studio, which our studio was again working very hard on their sustainability aspects. So that was one way that we didn't have people sitting and idling. And it kind of became a bit of a culture thing where even the other drivers were, I wouldn't say admonishing, but it'd be like, hey, Clara, no idling. In another sense of kind of something that wasn't really a tangible benefit. It kind of, everybody got on the right team. So it worked well.
I found that on the last show that I was a producer on, I went to set in the middle of November in a very, very cold rainstorm. And I got picked up at crew parking. And the shuttle driver was a daily driver. So I didn't know him. And I got in the car and he handed me a blanket and he said, "I'm really sorry, we can't idle on this show." And he gave me a blanket put on my lap. Obviously, if you have people who need to idle because of all the things that Dave just mentioned, get them in electric cars, get them in hybrid cars so that they're not emitting while they're idling. For everybody else, it is definitely creating space for them that works. I've asked location managers to make sure that the transport shuttle vans are lined up under trees in the summer so that there's shade.
Right.
They're in the sun, in the winter. I've asked for the ADs to make sure that they give the cast drivers the warning that they require based on the temperature outside. A lot of it is the communication of just making sure that people aren't on standby. Because when we're on standby, if you're going into meal penalty and there's 10 shuttle buses outside the front door and you don't know you're going into meal penalty and nobody is kind of being honest about this is going to take 25 minutes, then you're going to idle for 25 minutes. All of that can create greater fuel efficiency on a film set.
Right. Yeah, and we found too that, going back to sort of strong arming our suppliers, the sense of competition amongst them was really helpful as well, because it just thinking about the trailers. So the cast trailers we have a few suppliers here, and the one company is quite forward thinking as far as their impact. So they started to the newer trailers and even converting older trailers to more efficient lighting, solar, LED lighting, all that stuff. And then when the other companies saw that they were being left behind, they started retrofitting their trailers for solar and more efficient lighting, et cetera. So that sense of competition between the suppliers really helped us because they were willing to go and put out the capital cost just to remain competitive and to be able to stay, because it wasn't that I was trying to get a better deal. I was just saying, look, if it comes down to it, I need to choose a vendor that's going to fit within the sustainability program that we're trying to implement here. So.
Mike?
I think the important thing is also that the technology is changing faster than you can blink. So as you reach out to your suppliers, as you reach out to your even speak with your transport coordinators, don't assume that the information you have is current. There is all the equipment companies are getting new vehicles all the time. The trailers are being upgraded. The generators are getting better. There's new fuel out there. There's so much that we can do, but you have to stay informed and you have to look for it. And then let everybody on your set know that you're doing it, because it does create a different mindset and we all work together. Nobody makes content by themselves. We need every department to participate.
And I always say too, look to your departments to give you information. Like, I don't know anything about lighting, but work with your gaffer, your electric department to push the limits of what they're doing as well. Look to your transport department to do their research as well. Like, we as producers can look to our departments too to help inform us and as well. So
I know in some of your other sessions, you're talking more about facilities and kind of what the studios are doing to, enable productions to be more sustainable. And I think just like we're pushing our suppliers, we're pushing ourselves to invest in our own infrastructure and our inventories to do that. So there's so many tools and technologies that we can bring to bear to reduce our demands on the grid as well as on fuel use. And then I also wanted to talk a little bit about SPA, the Sustainable Production Alliance. Whereas Warner Brothers is doing these things and, all the divisions across WarnerMedia, the other studios are in this as well. We're all looking for the same solutions and we're working together to try and drive innovation and pilot new technologies, share information with the industry at large through the Green Production Guide, creating tools and resources for independent productions, film schools, and so forth. So we're all in this together. And I think, David, you bring up a great point where when people understand what it is that we're trying to do, they buy into it and everyone kind of joins in the effort. And I think that's what we need. Creating healthy competition out there is a good thing too. Everyone trying to make sure that they're remaining competitive, because this is what is required of our industry now to be more efficient and be more sustainable. And we're going to be looking for those suppliers that are able to meet those demands. So a lot of great momentum. Thank you for the conversation today. It's great to have these conversations and to have these dialogues so that we can continue to accelerate towards a more sustainable industry.
It's, I think, a good thing for the industry. But on a personal note, I'm kind of watching my phone because my son and his partner are about to have my first grandchild. So,
exciting.
We want to leave the world a better place for sure.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you, Diana, Dave, and Mike for being part of this vehicle panel. This is a huge part of production. I think that transport and its related activities are responsible for over half of the emissions on a film set. So learning about what to do better is just fantastic. So thanks to all our panelists. And here's the main message: do what you can. If you're in a jurisdiction or on a show that doesn't have batteries, tie-ins, or electric vehicles available, then just stop idling. Turn off your car, turn out the lights at lunch. Just start thinking about saving fuel. Thanks everyone for watching, and I hope you have learned a bit about clean energy and how to electrify your sets.
Thanks for joining us. There's a wealth of information about sustainable production on greenproductionguide.com, including infographics, research, case studies, a vendor database, and other SEEDS events, and more, all available to everyone. Join us, the SPA and PGA Foundation Green Committee, in our quest to make all production sustainable production.